Okay, so I wanted to talk about this next assignment and it's altered landscapes. You have two images that are due, and I'm also going to on Wednesday when we meet, we will talk about the final project as well. But this is what I want you to be kind of percolating on um, tonight and tomorrow. And what I mean by the altered is that you are going to change the landscape. You are going to add things, you're going to manipulate it somehow. But in this manipulation, you are not harming or permanently damaging anything in nature. All right. So Richard Long is the British photographer who I think of first when I think of landscape or altered landscape. And so he walks, and then in his walking and in his trails and things like that, he makes by walking in the same circle over and over and over again. His feet um, make a mark on the ground, and then when that mark is visible, he photographs it. And so that is him making the mark. It's not anything like if he were to leave it alone, it would the snow would refill those places where he walked, right? So it's not damaging, it's not permanent, but he's kind of doing the I was here thing in the with the backdrop of the beautiful Alps behind him, right? It's beautiful. This was in Peru where he kicked the rocks to the left or to the right so that this made a line, and he did this idea a couple different times. Here's just rearranging rocks or whatever you find in the landscape to create a shape. Again, you're kind of, forcing this conversation between your arrangement and then what's going on in the environment in which your arrangement is being made. It can be a really interesting conversation, and it can come, you can come up with some really interesting things. Yeah, so again, you start to see some recurring shapes, but not very complicated shapes. I would encourage you in this one, the composition is not, it's almost like a bad postcard kind of composition or feeling, but I think you can do a little bit more than what he was doing here in the 70s with these compositions that are very balanced and centered. Um, but the contrast, think about the contrast of things. So, if you pick up different colored shells and make shapes with different colored shells, even the idea of stacking stones, that's an altered thing you're doing to the landscape. You could stack your stones and then photograph it. So here the grass by going back and forth over the grass, you it flattens down again, leaving your mark. Or picking the weed flowers in a X shape. And so then some of their more fine art work and the stuff you might see in museums of Richard Long's is it might be installations like this, or where they bring rocks and things like that into the gallery. But I want you to think of it in more like this photo of an installation. But I want you to think about it of doing these kind of sculptures, these temporary altered landscape sculptures, and then using the photograph as the method of documenting that. All right. Oh, I forgot to put the end of this guy's name. Oh my gosh, I'll have to text it on top later. But another photographer who does some altered landscapes and using natural elements, but also in a completely different, unexpected kind of manner. Um, it's really beautiful, I think, landscape, and it really, I mean, it makes you think about um, time and things that grow in a whole different way when it's pieced apart like this, right? I mean, there's just something, you're starting a whole new conversation, a whole new idea. How these sticks are woven around a tree, you can see various other Almost, they look like a batten or a skirt around a tree. Here, just some branches that were cut and the straight ones kind of replanted in a forest. So Andy Goldsworthy is a very popular sculptor. This is not a very good image. And what he does, he goes into an environment and kind of studies it and decides to use the materials that are available on the space where he's working to create various sculptures. And this is the North Pole, and that's exactly the center, and each circle is facing north, south, east, west. And you got to try to ignore the color in these and think of this more as contrast and values. But just by arranging a pile of leaves based off of like an ombre um, effect can be really kind of a cool thing. Or rearranging sticks the next time you go on a hike. Maybe you're going on the hike this week. Right? These are uh, sticks from the ocean and river, driftwood, small pieces of driftwood. This is again, he's assessing what's available, and it's fall, so the leaves had fallen and he just stuck them in the grooves of the tree. This is from the background. This would make a more interesting photograph. This one, for the purposes of what is being done, you can kind of see it. It's very cool. And then you see him revisiting some places over and over and seeing what he can come up with. And certainly we have a wonderful canvas of sand. Maybe you're into sandcastles or whatever. Um, and then we talked last week a little bit about multiple images, and this is something you can kind of do. Um, I mean, one of the things about land art is that it's not permanent, and that you can maybe go back and revisit and see what it looks like later. And I went to graduate school with a guy who was doing those, and he was geo tracking and all that stuff. You guys probably remember, and you'd have to go hike and find the art, and then that's the only way you could see it. And so these kind of the next few show like maybe every couple days he goes back, and then eventually the leaves have been blown away and dried up so that they don't reveal any of his hand there. So this series was 4 images. This one is what we were talking about, a diptych, 2 photographs. And again, showing a progression of, throwing sticks in the air um, is kind of a self-portrait, making land art. Here's another one where he would go back and re-photograph at different times to see. So I mean, people talk about him as a sculptor, but he's just as much a photographer, I believe, because he documents his pieces and they're done very, very well. Here's another one. But see, we're looking at time passing, and then what happens to the imprints, the temporary shapes he's putting into the ground. John Fall, this guy's a much more kind of conceptual in his ideas, and this idea of flattening out or confusing space. So we're looking at, it looks like farmland here, and then you've got the Big Dipper kind of planned out with road flares. Here, where he's tricking our eye about what we know about perspective with the way the string is laid out on top of the dried earth, um, wrapping rocks in tinfoil makes you feel, that we're looking at like a cross section, or this is this continuation of a line, something you only notice because he has made us notice. And then this is, not so much about a space, and that's really what I think landscapes are images that talk about a space. But this illustrates his idea of like playing with that depth of field and sense of depth in his work. And again, this is like yarn in an actual landscape where the strings kind of emphasize the diagonalness of this rock, right? It's this plunging part here. Yeah. Okay, so this is someone I've found on the internet that I thought was doing some pretty interesting things. And I'm like, we live near the beach, and so I like this idea of um, almost a kind of a childlike fort, decorative, but something that's engaging in the beautiful space. We live in such an interesting area. Now let's see what we can do with the beach and sand as our canvas, but we are not harming things. It's temporary, blah, blah, blah. Judy Natal, she lives out in Vegas and she uses a lot of recycled lettering, and things like that that she puts into a land, and then so she kind of manipulates the space. Maybe you have something you want to take into the land. It doesn't have to be natural, but you of course cannot leave it there. Um, but so the words like death, in the desert, and the idea of beauty in this mirrored glass, and what is pretty. So yeah, so hopefully you've got some ideas. And again, we will talk on Wednesday.